Hello, welcome to Cybersecurity Unlocked. If you are watching on YouTube, please help like and subscribe. Leave a comment to get all of the latest updates. I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Garrod, who is currently the CISO for PitPro. Hi, great to see you. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're obviously a cybersecurity career podcast, so really keen to hear. I think you've got a really fascinating story, and just to sort of kick things off, how did you get started?
Okay, so I was very interested in computers and networking back when I was doing my GCSEs and my A-levels. And I had a fantastic opportunity to do my Cisco networking course when I was around 17, 18. And I remember speaking to someone at the time that was sort of saying, you know, the internet was just kicking off now. And someone was saying, well, what we don't have yet is laws for the internet. This is kind of a little bit of the Wild West, a new Wild West for us. And this is going to be big in a few years' time. And it sort of dropped a sort of seed in my mind. I then worked for an internet service provider and then moved on to a hedge fund where we in-housed IT infrastructure, so lots of exposure to different technologies. And then I was looking at site reliability, business continuity planning. We were regulated, so we had a regulatory lens on lots of things that we were doing. We had high availability demands and needs. And so when cybersecurity started to become a focus back in around 2014, 2015, certainly by the regulators, and working for a company which had a lot of intellectual property to protect, it was a nice natural next step for me to then move into a CISO role. And then I worked there as a CISO for 6-7 years before moving on to e-payments at PPRO, and I've been there almost 3 years.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think that was really the boom year, wasn't it? 2013, 2014, where cybersecurity really started to become like a thing in its own right and breaking away from kind of technology.
Yeah, for me, I think it was Stuxnet around 2012. I'd have to double check, but for me, we sort of moved on from the spamming and the bots and all of these Viagra emails that were coming in, and we were starting to see people using anti-malware. But then the Stuxnet for me was a bit of a eye-opener because they lived off the land. It was highly targeted. I think that one came in via a USB stick. So we were now learning that actually you can't prevent all things, and that you can't just switch off to the internet. By connecting to the internet and doing business now, and with a world that's becoming digitalized, the risk is now increasing, but also the attack path and the vectors are becoming a lot more challenging. So this was just fascinating, really fascinating about how you would go about protecting yourself, protecting your business, protecting individuals in a world that's rapidly evolving from technology, the threat, people, process, digitization. Yeah.
Okay, great. And was there anything specific like that you upskilled in or trained in as you were sort of making that sort of transition into security?
Yeah, I think so. So I've had a number of SANS courses. So I've done the SANS. I think it's the SANS 504, 515, which is the Advanced Defender course. Big fan of SANS. I've done their 514, which is their Strategic Leadership one. But I think also it's for me, I'm big on self-investment and sort of self-growth and that kind of thing. So reading the books, like YouTube, Twitter, there's so much resources out there. So if you're quite passionate about what you do and you live and breathe it, I think that there's so much you can do and learn without having to pay a lot of money for courses, even though there are some fantastic paid for courses.
Yeah, great. And what do you now, as a sort of how many years have you been operating as a CISO now?
About 10 years.
Wow. Okay. So as a sort of a hiring manager, what do you tend to sort of look for, and in terms of people, structure, target operating model, what's your sort of priorities?
Yeah, so it will all depend on the size of the firm, the type of firm that you've got there. But roughly, I look into sort of dividing a CISO office team into sort of 3 pillars. So I will sort of look at DevSec or engineering. So is our product, is our technology secure, enterprise IT, potentially going into AppSec, maybe offensive defense there. So is our technology and what we're doing secure? Then I would look at SecOps, so that's detection and response and recovery. Lots of fun stuff you can have in that domain, and of course many companies will outsource some of that. And then governance, risk and compliance, so roughly 3 pillars I would put in your sort of average CISO target operating model.
Okay. Just another topic actually as well. Where do you stand on purple teaming? Because purple team is something that kind of started to come in around maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Or maybe a little bit longer than that. And obviously the purpose of that is to try and build a better kind of relations between blue and red team. What's your sort of stance on that? Do you think that works?
Totally. For me, that's the dream, right? That's the end goal, if there is such a thing, because we know the goalposts keep moving and things are always evolving. But yeah, absolutely. That's when you iteratively get better. So when you run your defending your blue team against your red team, which is attack, and you're running these side by side, potentially with honeypots and aligning to MITRE ATT&CK and some of these other frameworks. I mean, that is, for me, is where you can have a lot of fun. But I think that's the advanced stage. So you have to get those fundamentals right, whether that's vulnerability management, asset management, access control. Those things maybe are less exciting or sort of, less cool maybe, but they're incredibly hard to get right sometimes. And if you're not doing those well, then your investment and your focus and priority has to be there before, I believe, in most cases, you can move on to doing some of the purple teaming. Because otherwise you're going to throw up a lot of things that you already know is bad. And it doesn't mean you can't run purple teaming in parallel with looking at some of these fundamentals, but that's the start. Get those foundational things in right first. That makes sense. I was interested how there's some organizations have adopted it and some just haven't. So I was interested. It seems to be quite sort of divisive. And what are your sort of priorities going into 2024 in terms of what we're faced with, emerging tech, AI, and all of the. Okay. So going into 2024, so as a company, we've been very much focused on migration to the cloud controls, software delivery lifecycle, CI/CD, some of the shifting left, all of that great stuff. That's where we put a lot of investment in as a team. Moving into 2024, we want to level up our SecOps, our detection and response. We've got a solid team, but for me as a company, that's what we're looking into. I think as a general industry, I think there's interesting stuff that's happening. I don't know whether 2024 is going to be the year for most CISOs. I think, if I'm going to predict, it would be sort of 2026, maybe and beyond. But deep fakes, AI, the biases that can happen with AI, protection for individuals, that is coming. I don't know if that's 2024.
That really is like deep fake now. That's scary because you just think, well, what's the next evolution of deepfake, and what are you going to be able to trust?
Oh, I know and I wonder whether there's something in the multiple channels of authentication, like multi-factor, whatever that looks like, because you could easily today spoof your CEO's telephone number, spoof their voice, phone someone in your finance department and try and dupe them into transferring money. And they would be none the wiser. They would sort of look at this and quite rightly think that they were speaking to the right individual. So then it's what other mechanisms do you put in place then to then contact the CEO on another channel, or make sure that you've got robust processes in place with, going back to things like segregation of duties, the 2 eyes sign off on things. Some of those controls will help you, but depending on the maturity of the company and what they're doing, for example, if the company is relatively small, or if they're going through a series of acquisitions or mergers and acquisitions, you may find that it's actually completely normal for a CEO to phone someone and say, top secret, I need you to do this quickly. I don't want you to follow the process that you normally follow because this is a confidential thing. So you can still see how some of these things could happen. And I think deep fakes will make it a lot more harder for us to be able to trust the normal channels and mechanisms that we use.
Yeah. Yeah, that is one thing that really does sort of scare me. Yeah, the deep fakes. But okay, great. Now, one of the things I was really keen to sort of explore with you as well is the current D&I initiatives and how effective do you think they are? And I think some companies do them better than others. Where do you think that maybe some are kind of falling down, or what could be sort of improved, do you think?
I think it's it's a topic that's really close to my heart. Being a woman in technology, being a woman in finance. I think you're right. Some companies do better than others. For me, I kind of always go back to psychological safety. So, yes, you can make sure your talent acquisition teams and you're hiring the right people, that you've got the right funnel of individuals coming in. I do believe we can sometimes go too far and not be meritocracy. So we want to hire the right individual for the role, and we want to hire that individual because they're good at what they're doing, not because they tick a diversity box. Yeah. But you have to make sure you're getting a good pipeline of candidates in that are diverse. So you have to make some effort there. But the psychological safety part for me is that belonging piece. So I think if you look and sound different to the people that you're working with, or you come from a very different background, you're not necessarily going to feel as safe as the rest of the pack when it comes to voicing your opinions or challenging things. And we want this. We want to have environments where people are free to be themselves. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but bring your best self to work. And we want diverse groups of people, because some magic happens when you get lots of different people from different backgrounds that are safe and feel that they can share their opinions and that they can be wrong. There's I think it's Ken Robinson, I think he passed away in COVID, and one of his quotes was something along the lines of, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never do anything that's innovative or new. So for me, it's a case of, and I always get goosebumps when I hear that quote because it means so much to me. Yeah. But, if you look and sound different, how do we make sure that we are educating everybody in the organisation, particularly managers and those responsible for people, to understand and have this awareness that if you have an individual that looks or sounds different, or they're from a minority group, making sure that that individual feels safe and feels heard. And I think that's the belonging part that goes one step further from inclusion. I think I see a lot of companies that do the DE&I metrics and put that in their reports, but I don't think we're doing enough from a human resources perspective, from a leadership, management of people perspective internally. I think there's a lot more we could do more in terms of coaching people that are within organisations to understand some of those concepts. Yeah,
I've seen it firsthand actually, where D&I initiatives are brought into kind of like interview process or recruitment process, and you can tell the ones that are just sort of a box ticking exercise, because the infrastructure and the environment is really set up for them to succeed, and it's really just ticking the box, and then that's it, we've done our bit. And I feel like there hasn't been a lot of thought or a lot of investment into making sure that that person is going to be successful.
And I can see that happening because people do care, but implementing strategies to make it really work is quite often not the priority, unfortunately.
I do. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. What are the sort of the common challenges or barriers that you've had to overcome, and being sort of a CISO as long as you have? You must have maybe had to deal with some of those prejudices in the workplace. Like, how did you sort of overcome them, and if there's anything that you could share on that?
Yeah, so I think many of the prejudices that I've sort of seen or had have been really hard to be sure that they are there. Sometimes it might be some mansplaining, sometimes it might be the assumption that you don't know what you're talking about. And they exist, but they're very hard to call out and sort of say, is that really happening? Am I being sensitive here? Am I reading into this and this isn't happening? When I first started my career, I think I held myself back a bit. We talk about imposter syndrome, and I think the new thought process along this is that it's not imposter syndrome, it's the environment that creates imposter syndrome. So people shouldn't feel like imposters, they should feel safe. And I guess we circle back to that psychological safety topic. But I think for me, it was a case of, I'm a young woman, I don't have a track record behind me. I was working with lots of very bright and intelligent people, very intimidated by that. So I think that I often didn't voice my opinion or challenge things. And if I did receive what was blatant sexism, I also didn't challenge that. Now I'm a woman going into my 40s, and it's a case of I've got a track record. I'm happy with what I've achieved and strengths and weaknesses that exist within me. But I also feel responsible for those women coming behind me, that I want them to do well. And so I'm much more likely to call it out. I'm much less likely to be affected by it. I'm much more likely to be outspoken and challenge things and have it brush off me, water off a duck's back. So it does exist still. I think it also exists from women to women. And I hold my hands up there as well. If I see a young woman, because of my upbringing, because of our social conditioning, the assumption may be that that woman isn't technical, or that woman might be in a more of an administrative position. So it's not just a male and female thing, it's a social conditioning that our parents have had, that we've had some of. So I guess awareness is going to be that the first key there, and for people that have been on that journey to pave the way for those that are coming up behind us.
Yeah, I think, unconscious bias exists in all of us, doesn't it? So it happens all the time. So I guess we can all be sort of guilty of it. But I think there's definitely a shift happening. And, working in tech is actually cool now. When you were probably studying, it probably wasn't cool. You were probably one of the outcasts. So that's really awesome. And going back to what you tend to look for, I just wanted to explore that a little bit more as well, if I may, in terms of the key attributes that you look for in your SecOps, your security engineers, governance, risk and compliance. What are kind of the key sort of soft skills that you tend to look for?
Okay, so I think that I love to have a really diverse team, so not everybody needs to be the same. And also, going back to conscious bias, you have to be careful that you're not hiring people that are just like you. I think attitude goes a long way. So hiring someone that's got the right attitude, especially if they're junior, sort of being thirsty to learn and do things. But I think if they are junior, you then need to make sure that they've got the right mentorship and coaching. And I know in the past I've spread myself far too thin and hired people that need more support than I've been able to give them. But in other topics, I guess there's always going to be a technical expertise there. So regardless of whether that's governance, risk, compliance, or something that's very technical, I think communication is key, particularly from the leaders. So for me, a good CISO, certainly a CISO with a technical bent, or working in a fintech or some of those environments that I'm used to, they become successful because they can talk to risk and they can talk to the complexity of technology in a language that's executive level, but not just executive level, but sort of layman's terms, so that they can take all of this complexity and the challenges and really talk to that in a few moments or a few minutes with a senior team to really be able to get stuff done and get backing and support. So communication, I think, is a key one for senior individuals. Technical proficiency, regardless of the domain that they're coming into, and then attitude, probably for less senior people.
And do you see any kind of shift in how a typical org structure is going to look like with the emergence of automation? Do you think there's anything that is becoming quite sort of commoditized and can be easily outsourced? I've noticed that threat intelligence seems to kind of has dropped off a little bit in recent years in terms of the demand.
Yeah, that's interesting. So certainly my experience with threat intelligence is it's very easy to switch it on and then do nothing with it because you're doing other things. So I think in terms of the SecOps side of things, and sorry, what was that question again? Sorry. In terms of
how the org structure and your target operating model may sort of evolve with maybe from sort of next year in terms of, what's being automated and how that structure might change.
Yeah, so for automation, automation is a big thing that's part of my heart, and I have to be careful I don't just say automation and it doesn't become this buzzword. But I like to see things done efficiently and done well, and so having things live as code means that you can repeat them and that they're likely to be more accurate and you're going to be able to do more of it at scale.
Yeah.
So for me, I think we've been on a bit of a journey in terms of automation for security teams and for tech teams, where we've gone sort of digitization. We're now seeing low code, no code, where you're using tools to kind of connect to get your Workday or your HiBob with your Confluence and your Jira. So we're seeing some automation that exists there. And a security team now needs to understand the threats that might exist in a slightly new world.
Yeah.
For a security team, I think you are going to have to increase your resources when it comes to things like infrastructure as code, monitoring, creating things such as, for us we're AWS, and so we'll use a lot around lambdas and data enrichment. So I think there's a lot you can do to improve your monitoring. Yeah. And now we've got security orchestration, automation response. So there's a lot more you can do to make sure that you take in an alert and then you respond quickly.
Yeah.
And then the final part of that, what we're kind of looking at is now auditing as code. So how can we make sure that we've got to prove what we're saying we're doing, either in financial audits for security standards, PCI DSS, ISO 27001, SOC, all of those standards out there, especially if you're audited, financially audited, or you're regulated, or you have financial certifications. How do you prove what you're doing in a quick and efficient way? Yeah. So how can you have auditing as code? So I do think there's going to be more of a expansion on the sort of security engineering side for your team.
Right.
So your SecOps team needs to also think about business processes that live as code to support the rest of your team. Typically, that's what I would see, or that's what I would grow.
Yeah. How do you balance being, because obviously as a CISO, you're kind of part of that sort of executive team now and a lot of facing off to the business. How do you balance that with staying so close to technology? I can see how you're talking about technology, you're very passionate about it, but I guess it's not really your kind of role anymore. You're really kind of steering the ship. So how do you stay close to the technology? Have you always got like your head in a book, I'm sure?
A little bit. So if I read a technology book, it's gonna stay in there for a short period of time because I'm not then going to use it. So when Kubernetes came about, I read a book on Kubernetes security and I turned that into a little bit of a framework and a checklist for my own knowledge. So if new technologies come out, I will do a bit of reading, so I feel like I can understand things. But other than that, it's making sure you've got good teams. And a good working relationship between your security team and your engineering teams. For me, getting this harmonious and solid and having these working together and learning from each other and feeling like they've got each other's backs. Yeah. The security team's enabling engineering, and engineering seeing security as a brother or a sister that they lean on and use to support them to get to the right answers. So I think it's having the right teams below you. Yeah. I think you can also look at frameworks to then talk to, so you might have cloud controls and there's lots of frameworks out there, and you could potentially use that to then bubble that up into a few statements to then describe your maturity or your risk that would then translate to an executive level. But for me, it's all about people, all about having the right people that are having good conversations, and that you've got that trust with them and the trust with each other so that you can then have those good conversations at an executive level. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And how have you found, because, from a lot of the CISOs that I speak to, they're, 12, 14-hour days, sometimes on weekends as well if there's a breach. How do you balance that responsibility with also being, the parent and having a family? Like, what sort of house rules do you have?
So I'm definitely not the poster child for this. I'm definitely not always getting it right. And I tend to be quite an intense person, and I'm really passionate about what I do. And, everything's evolving. You can never stay on top of things. And you also know that you're a little bit on the line if things go bad. And even if you're doing everything right and everything, you couldn't do anymore, you could still be used as a scapegoat if things go wrong, and you have to get comfortable with that. So
stressful.
Yeah, it is. So there's compartmentalization, which again, I'm not necessarily very good at. But then for me, there's sort of basic strategy. So eating well, prioritizing sleep, prioritizing exercise, making sure those things happen. I went through a period of time where I was having, overlapping meetings in my diary. My dad had just passed away. I had a young baby in the house. COVID had hit. So I had a lot of pressure. I was barely getting bathroom breaks, barely getting time to eat. I'd sort of come out of a meeting, chuck some toast some bread in the toaster, and quickly go to the bathroom, quickly come back to meetings. And I'm also quite introvert, so I much prefer to be solving a problem and talking about it generally. And I started to see some therapy. So for me, I had this feeling, even on quiet days, my body felt stressed and tense.
Yeah.
So I started to have neuro-linguistic programming therapy, which is a little bit out there compared to some therapies, but it's just been fantastic. A little bit of meditation to try and set my day up. I try and block out my diary as well now, so people can't so I can't have back-to-back meetings. The one that I'm not very good at staying on top of is a lunchtime walk. I always intend to go out for a lunchtime walk, and suddenly I just get roped into email, and then I'm like, oh, no, the opportunity's passed now.
Yeah.
So little things like that can help. I think also making sure you've got a good support network.
Yes.
And recognising when you're not. Yeah, definitely. And understanding when you're not switching off.
Yeah.
Taking holidays, all of that thing. But I think you have to think about prioritising yourself first. It's that what is it? The oxygen mask first. You have to give it to yourself.
Yes.
And as a woman, I don't feel guilty about doing stuff for myself as a mum.
Yeah.
I know that many women and many mums struggle with that initially. So, is it they feel guilty if they're not doing something for their children or something for their job? But no, I'm happy to go to the gym because I know that then I come back and I'm a better mum.
You're a better version of yourself, and they get the benefits of that as well. Yeah, I'm the same. I try and set aside an hour to do exercise every day. And then from 6 till 7 is dinner time, no phones, everybody, the whole family's at the table. And that's Monday to Friday, no questions, no meetings go in at that time. So yeah.
But then I think you pick up your phone after 6 and 7, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Evening times are not mine, unfortunately. That's the troubles of working in different time zones.
Of course, that is a challenge.
Yeah. This actually leads into my other question I had quite nicely. Actually, was a recent study that I'd read that say 1 in 5 people in cybersecurity will suffer from burnout. And I think going back to the industry, if there's anything that you think maybe the industry could do to maybe provide a better sort of support structure for people like yourself, and it's not just CISOs, it's generally I guess people in the cyber defense that are dealing with the fallout of a network breach or ransomware attacks.
Gosh, yeah. So I think definitely having good CISO networks. So I'm on a number of different CISO networks, and there's a WhatsApp group where we talk about mostly non-security stuff.
Yeah.
So this can be good because you've got people out there that are living and breathing the same thing. I think for industry in general, I think we're moving in the right direction because we're talking about resiliency now. I see, pre-2014, 2015, the regulators were talking about business continuity planning and reliability, and then we moved on to sort of a focus and a lens on cyber, and now we're kind of looking a little bit more business continuity planning again, but with a cyber focus. So this is good because we're talking about, we know bad things can happen. You can be doing everything reasonably right, but still something bad can happen. So I think that is a good mindset to have, knowing that even the best CISO and the best team in the world that have done their cost, benefit, risk analysis, and they're happy with what they're doing, bad stuff can still happen. I would like to see more here around educating. Certainly, I think some CISOs would benefit from that. In general, risk management. So For me, what I do is I will raise things as a risk, try and quantify that, and make sure it's well communicated. And sometimes we just have to accept something because we don't have the current resources or there's other priorities going on. So for me as a CISO, and because CISO can't own the risk, right?
Yeah.
This isn't my risk to own. My job is to identify it, make sure we're selecting the right controls, and then are able to detect and defend against that. So for a CISO, there's this kind of cover your mentality sometimes, where you can get good at the sort of documentation around that risk. It still means that you may get used as a scapegoat, but I would like to have much more of a focus on what CISOs do is they protect revenue and they protect data, they protect individuals' information. They do it by risk management. They don't necessarily do it by implementing these controls. Rarely are they implementing the controls. That's with other teams. So how do we judge CISOs more on their risk management and their communicational risk rather than have they been hacked?
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting take. The other thing I was going to ask you as well, mentors. I think, having mentors in any kind of career, it doesn't have to be cyber, I think is really important. Do you have how many mentors do you have, or people that you will kind of pick their brains on certain topics?
Yeah, I think a few, and particularly when I was younger. So when I was younger, I had some great mentors, really great mentors, where I felt safe to sort of go, what are we doing and why are we doing it this way? And they would really talk to the why. So I really learned about some of these fundamentals of engineering, so scalability and reliability and this quality. So definitely in my earlier part of the career, and I'm really keen to see that happen, because if you do get that right, then really in theory anyone can be successful. Now I've got mentors that are a little bit more picky and choosy depending on the area. I have a great counsel when it comes to risk management, which is fantastic, and he will sort of share some strategies and approaches that have been helpful. My current line manager, he's fantastic at the moment. He will challenge me. He's always trying to push me to do better, but I also feel very safe that I can vent or share some things that aren't quite working very well. I also think there's a good thing around leadership training as well. So coaching retreats, these kind of things where you can sort of spend a day focused on yourself, on your strengths and weaknesses, things that aren't working so well. I used to be terrible at public speaking. I'm still not fantastic at it.
Really?
Yeah.
I find that surprising.
Thank you. I've obviously worked hard.
You have, yeah. It's paid off.
Thank you. So, and quite introverted and very shy and very bashful. So these kind of things I think are really good. I think also sponsorship. So if you're trying to rise up the ranks and you want to have more impact and influence, who's your sponsor at a senior level where you can sort of come to them and sort of express that you've got this desire to do better. And don't ever assume that you're going to be given a pay rise or given the better job. Make it very clear. You want to go places, you're ambitious, you want to switch to a management track, you want to one day become a CISO, and then when you're speaking to your line manager or other individuals in the company or outside of the company, you're working towards that. I think despite having some success and going up to a CISO position, I wish I'd vocalized things actually a little bit earlier on. I kind of thought that if I worked really hard and I was really good, I'd just be recognized, but it actually doesn't necessarily work like that. So push for this. And the most successful people absolutely have mentors and a good support network. So there's no such thing as getting there on your own.
Yeah, you have to. It's sometimes a taboo subject, isn't it, when you talk about promotion and advancing your career, because for the time that you're under certain management, you're making them look very good, and you've got to be rewarded at some point for that, and you've got to be given your chance to, step out of their shadow.
Yeah, and I think a good manager steps aside.
Yes.
So I think a good manager makes it fair, because you by proxy get credit, either because you've hired the right person or your team is doing great things. So a good manager steps aside and lets that individual get all the limelight. And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, of course. No,
it doesn't. Yeah, great. And after, what's sort of next for you? What's, in your, other career aspirations do you have?
So I think I definitely want to do more on boards. So at the moment I'm on a board of one of our entities in the group that I'm on, definitely sort of NED roles. I'd love to support up and coming startups that don't have the financial capacity to hire a CISO. Their security still works in technology.
Yeah.
Companies that are moving to the cloud, they're looking at what they're going to need to do one day. I'd love to be involved in that. I'd love to do more on the altruistic side, along the sort of mentorship. I definitely find being a mum, being very passionate about my job, working in organisations where I've built the security team up from scratch, there's been a lot of work to do, and I've already been quite thinly spread, but I'd love to move more into an altruistic role now. You know, I've worked with financial technology, fantastic.
Yeah.
But what about the companies and the individuals and the charities out there that may need support? And for me, that would be a great next step.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that'll be. What would be your advice on something? Because I do speak to a lot of sort of executives that are clearly very good at what they do, but they're not very good at the networking part. And I guess that's obviously a key fundamental of being opened up to non-exec board level roles or in helping startups. What sort of steps would you make to get into that? Is it just a case of networking?
I think so. Yeah, I think definitely. I think. And I'm not very good at networking. I tend to just, go home and be with my children. And I do internal brand management. So I do a lot of internal PR because security awareness is part of delivering and solving a solution. But I don't do a lot externally. So I think there's a lot more you could do externally to raise your profile, maybe on LinkedIn, Twitter, some of these other environments. Definitely networking.
Yeah.
And then hopefully it moves on from there. There's probably other ways in which you can do this as well, but networking is probably key. And I think if I'm serious about what you just said, what's next for me, I think I need to do a bit more of that.
Got to do more of it. Got to do more. Yeah, absolutely. Can't do enough of it, I don't think. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming down today and sharing your story. You're an inspirational figure. Great to hear your story. Best of luck for the future. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.